Hello and welcome to the presentation. The idea for this came about when an acquaintance of mine made the comment that we know what the answer is. The answer to combat inflation is high interest rates. But if interest rates make things cost more, how in the world does high interest rates actually help reduce inflation? We'll find out. So let's take a look at a couple of things, and let's start with what is the cause of inflation? Because there's really only one cause of inflation, and it's the government. We're on a fiat money system, which means we're not a commodity based, which we're not oil based or corn based or wheat based or silver based or gold based or anything like that. We're not exchanging cows. We just have the full faith and strength of our economy and the faith in our nation to say this is how much a dollar is worth. That's what it is. And we can, they print the money at their leisure. It's totally controlled by a central bank. So we have this thing called the QTM, the quantity theory of money, or I think is it depending on when you went to school, like if you did, I think we call it the equation of exchange, and it's MV equals PY. And I'll explain to you why the government causes inflation. Take something that is, say, supply and demand. Toilet paper during COVID. Well, there was an increased demand for toilet paper, and so people charge more money. If we have a shortage of cream cheese, then we will charge more money for what cream cheese does exist. That is a supply and demand issue. What causes inflation is a money supply. Now, to me and you, we might think of either one of them being inflation because things cost us more money. Our dollar is worth less. But really, that one is a cost of living increase and the other is inflation. Inflation is money supply, and I'll explain it. M is money supply. In this equation, when economists talk about it, they'll use either the M1 or M2. And that's because that can be thought of as the money, the loose money available in the economy that's not bound, tied up in an asset or whatever. It's free-floating money ready to be a participant in the economic activity of the nation. V is a little more esoteric kind of concept of the velocity of money. It really has to do with how fast those dollars are circulating. And if you kind of want to think about it in the most childlike way, say I mow your lawn for $20. $20 changed hands when you pay me. That's 20 exchanges. Then I pay, say, the grocer when I go buy food. That $20 is now changed hands again, $20 changed hands, and he uses it to pay his supplier and his bills with. That's another change. So velocity is sort of that notion of all of the money, how fast it changes and turns over in the economy, and M is how many of those dollars exist in the economy. And this is equal to the price level, P, which is the cost of all things. Just one price level is all of the things sold in the economy, and Y, of course, is the real GDP, gross domestic product. We don't take imports in here because it's domestic. We want to know what is the sort of the value of the nation's economy. Well, it can be expressed in either of these two terms, MV or PY. Now we know since Y is the output, we can't really change that overnight. We can't really make a quick change. So it tends to look more like a constant. Well, we know we really can't change how quickly the people in our economy who participate change that money around, so we really can't change Y. So what happens if we increase the numbers of dollars in the M1 or M2 money supply? Every dollar that goes in here will cause an increase in price. Money supply equals inflation. Now, what happened in 2020? Up to 2019, December, the last day in December in 2019, the nation's maximum number of dollars in the economy that ever existed in the history of the nation had not really exceeded about $4 trillion. Now, when 2020 hit and the Democrats took over the two branches of our bicameral Congress, the House and the Senate, and the White House, they took total control and there was no regulation. It's just the simple. I'm not being political. That's the fact. Our Constitution says all spending bills must originate in the House, and the House did. And the counter to that keeps things from getting out of hand is a Senate who then will say yes, no, or amend or change or whatever. But they happen to be from the same party, same group, and they green-lighted everything. So Senate got everything it wanted, the House got everything it wanted, the bill went through, but we know we can count on our president to limit the spending. Well, he didn't because he's part of the same group. And so we actually went from the election, since the election, we've gone from $4 trillion in the money supply to $22 or so trillion in the money supply. So when M goes through the roof, prices go through the roof. The government caused inflation. Now, how is this a wealth transfer to the government? How is inflation a wealth transfer to the government? Pretty simple. If the value of our economic activity is some fixed amount that can change a little over time, think of something that can change a little over time. Think of an economy that the economy is a pumpkin. The pumpkin may get bigger, you may get more pounds out of the pumpkin, but at any given time, the pumpkin is a certain fixed size. All right, think about this. There's $2 floating in the economy, and that's the only thing you get is $2 in a pumpkin. That's the only economy, anything in the economy. Then how much is a dollar worth? It's worth a half a pumpkin. What if we double that money supply and make it $4? Now we still have the same pumpkin, same size pumpkin. So now a dollar's worth a quarter of a pumpkin, or half as much as it was before. All right, do that the same way with, say, to the tune of that $22 trillion, or 5 times the amount of dollars that are in circulation. Now suddenly your dollar is worth considerably less. Your dollar and my dollar, we can't change those on a very quickly type of path, can we? They're just ours. We have a fixed number, and that's probably all we're going to get. They're not going to change a whole lot. What happens when the government then prints more money? It waters down the value of our dollars, and it waters down the value of their dollars. But the reason they don't care is because it doesn't cost them anything. It's a click of a keystroke, a stroke of a pen in an omnibus bill. And so if their dollar, if the government had, say, $1 worth of something, if printing $5 more dropped it to, say, 80 cents, they don't care, because now they have $5 at 80 cents a piece, which is considerably more than $1 worth a dollar. So they don't care. That's how it works. There's no restraint. Now let's talk about some microeconomics so we can see how taxation is theft, as some people call it. We'll see what they mean by that. Here's a microeconomic graph, not yet filled out, but we have two axes, the X and Y, and on the Y is the price from a low to a high. Higher price is the higher up we go, and quantity demanded is low at the angle and higher at the words. And if we have a curve on here, we've seen these X's before with a dot in the middle. Surely we've seen those somewhere in some publication. It may be hard to remember which one is which. Well, we have demand is down. Down starts with D. Demand and D both start with D. The curve that goes down is the demand curve. Now, intuitively, it makes sense too. If you didn't know, you could recreate it. Well, if the price of something is very high, like right here on this axis, we probably don't want very much of it. If the price is very economical, very cheap, we probably want more of it. So the quantity demanded is higher when prices are low, and the quantity demanded is lower when prices are high. So that means that the supply curve has to be the other one. And it's inverse of that. If the price is very low, probably we're not going to get a supplier to supply very many of them. If the price can be very high, suppliers will probably produce a higher number. The quantity demanded will be higher for that. So they go that way. Now let's talk about that dot that we have, the price at which the transaction occurs. Think about houses, since I used the word transaction. Think about that. If you're trying to buy a house, you probably feel like you're competing against the seller. And if you're trying to sell a house, you probably think you're competing against the buyer. But you would be wrong in both cases. What you're actually competing against as a seller is other sellers, because you're trying to be the highest and best bid, the best offer, the highest and best offer to that homeowner that you're trying to buy their home, right? So you're competing against all the other buyers. The seller, you're the same way. You're trying to sell the best home for the least price because you're competing against other homes, other sellers. So what we end up with is a meeting of the minds in the middle. Now, if we look to activity on the right side, we see that this blue line represents the minimum price at any given quantity, all prices at the given quantities that the suppliers are willing to transact. And we have the green line, the demand, all of the prices, the maximum prices at which at all quantities that the buyers will buy. We see that if we're in this area, it's below what the producers will produce and above the price that the buyers will buy. So nothing happens in this side right here. It happens on this side. Let's go to the next slide. All right, let's take a specific example. Say we have an economy of nothing but energy drinks. Okay, the price at which the market acts at full capacity is $2 per unit to produce a maximum of 5 million units. Okay, this is the price which everything happens. The magic happens here. No government intervention. This is the maximum price that the sellers will give and the minimum price that the suppliers will supply for the agreement of 5 million units. Well, why do we say taxation is theft? Why do some people say taxation is theft? Well, first we have to know where the values are. Let's look at consumer surplus. It's a little hard for me to explain, but let's take Tom, Dick, and Harry. This is the price at which the exchange happens, $2. That's what the market's moving at. Now we have Tom over here who really likes his energy drinks, and his maximum price he'll pay for an energy drink is $5. So $5 is what he will pay, but he only had to pay $2. So if you think about it that way, for him to get what he wants, he actually saved a value of about $3, because he would have paid $5 if he had have needed to, but he only had to pay $2. Now Dick is here, Tom, Dick, and Harry. So Tom is here, Dick is here. He give $3.50 for a drink. That's his maximum. He doesn't like them as much as Tom does, and $3.50 is his limit. But he didn't have to give $3.50. He gave $2. So he essentially made the $1.50 here. And it gets all the way down to Harry, who Harry's maximum price he'll pay is $2. If it goes up anymore, Harry's out of the market. He's not paying it. It's not worth it to him. So if we take all of the people in all of the market and add them all of the buyers together, each one of them, their value is represented on the sales to the left of the actual intersection. The sellers have the same thing. They're trying to buy and save money. The sellers are trying to sell and earn money. So this is the line at which all products are produced at each given quantity. So at this low quantity, they're only willing to produce a certain number of units at this price. As price goes up, they'll produce more quantity. So what happens? They basically add value to their action this way in all of these sales from 0 up to 5 million, and they're saving money from 0 to 5 million. This is value. This has a value to it. Now, what about that government tax? Government decides, we don't want you drinking energy drinks. We don't think it's a good idea that you drink that much sugar and that much caffeine, so we want to punish you because we know better than you. We want to discourage your behavior. So we want to charge you 50 cents per can. Or maybe we just don't want the money and we tell you we care about your health. And maybe it is just about the money. We don't know. We just know the government has a big loaded gun called the IRS, and they take what they want. And if government says you'll pay 50 cents per can, you'll pay it. But remember Harry? Harry can't pay over $2. He won't pay over $2. So what happens when we put this 50-cent tax in? Well, this is 50 cents. It's not a unit number. It's not a single can. It's just a price difference. So we're going to end up with two new prices. All right? We're going to end up with a zone between those two prices. Right? Now we have a new price that the consumer will pay, and we'll have a new price that the seller will receive. And we have the government taking 50 cents out of the middle. But when we get that price, the buyers are only willing to buy 3 million units, and the sellers are at a price where they'll only produce 3 million units. So we've lost the economic activity of 2 million units when we introduced 50 cents tax into this market. When we didn't fiddle with it, we sold 5 million units, and the buyers and the sellers both maximized their values. But when government steps in, we now have choked off because we've raised the price to the buyer, and we've lowered the money paid to the seller. And we've created this spot we call the deadweight loss. Anytime the government sticks its nose in, they reduce the maximum economic activity that would have occurred had the government not interfered. What is deadweight loss? We see that it's a loss of 2 million units. 2 million units never got sold, so both buyers and sellers lose out. Nobody gets this, not even the government. That activity is just gone forever. It doesn't happen. Now, what about the orange part? Well, that's the government's revenue. We know they sold 3 million units at 50 cents tax per unit. They made $1.5 million. But who did they get it from? Where did it come from? Well, before the government tax, the consumer surplus was this entire green triangle that went from the price up and down. That was all of the net benefit to the transaction that the buyers enjoyed. The sellers had the same thing on the other side of the line of the price. Now the government steps in and it eliminates these transactions because it's a tax, and it decreases activity, and then it takes this value in revenue. Thank you for watching this video. I appreciate it. I have a story and a little bit of an ask of you. I also run a parallel channel on Rumble because of the story. I've had a YouTube channel for well over 10 years. It started out just for me and for friends, and it kind of grew. People liked the content, and very organically it grew. Never advertised or whatever. I got what I call a nastygram email from YouTube saying, if you don't advertise on your videos, we reserve the right to advertise on them. So I applied to their program. I went a full year and it timed out. They never would approve my channel, even though it met all the requirements. I've gone back. I'm in my second year. They don't do it. I had lots of views and things going up until the point my knees went bad and I couldn't get around, and I did a series on ATF items, silencer, suppressors, and ARs and etching and things like that. And all of a sudden I have fallen off the face of the earth. So if you will please consider helping someone else, you can let your voice be heard if you'll subscribe and hit the notification bell. If we get more activity coming back on this way, maybe somebody will notice. Maybe it'll help. I appreciate your time. I apologize for interrupting this video. So that's why some people might consider taxation theft. It's not voluntary. They're involuntary exactions. Now let's check the next slide. How is inflation? We've already talked about the pumpkin and about cutting that pumpkin in smaller pieces. How inflation is a tax that transfers wealth from the people to the government. Well, it looks very similar. If we didn't have inflation, we'd have a maximized amount of transactions at original price and original quantity. But when we add inflation, it costs more, so the buyers buy less and the sellers receive less, so it looks like a tax. It looks just like a tax in the picture, and we lose this activity. Inflation causes a net reduction of activity. It has its own deadweight loss. In one form or another, it's going to cause it. Now, this tax isn't collected directly in terms of being submitted to the IRS, but it is a tax that goes to the government. This is the money that results from the devaluation of the currency. So now what we had before is worth less, but the government gets some more because it gets to print its own dollars. That's how you can think about, where does this orange block of activity go? Inflation looks like a tax. And if you want to get to it, so does interest rate. If this diagram was the price of a cash buyer of a house, if we had just a little bit of interest rate, it would cause a little bit of this triangle, but it wouldn't be a very big triangle, would it? Because the interest is very little. We're not paying much for the money. But if interest is jacked up too quickly, it will create a deadweight loss, because now it makes the price too high for some buyers. Just like Harry couldn't buy or wouldn't buy the energy drink, there are people that will be locked out of the market because now the interest adds to the price and it's just too high, they can't pay it. And of course, because it's cutting into it, there is a new lower price received by the sellers. Since the buyers can't pay it, the sellers can't grab it, and we end up with fewer numbers of houses. This is called a change in quantity demanded. We haven't changed where the curve is because this is a quick, instantaneous change. Now let's talk a little bit about elasticity. We might think of homes as being very inelastic. It's a big ticket item, and it's something that you can't really make a lot of over a short period of time, so we don't really have a lot of elasticity of supply. And you think about it like food. There's not much substitute for food, is there? It's just food. And so we get that in our head. But at the same time, within food, there's a great deal of substitution and ways to avoid certain high prices that come in there. Say the cost of coffee goes through the roof. Well, we can substitute and buy tea or Coca-Colas or whatever, right? If the cost of beef goes through the roof, we can buy chicken and vice versa. So we can change things. Although there may not be a substitute for food, there is certainly substitutes within food. Housing is the same way. Okay, you can think you really only have to buy a house or not to buy a house, but you can also rent. You can freeload if you got a mom and daddy or a grandma, or you got grandchildren that'll let you stay, or live under a bridge, or move out to the middle of the woods on some public park where nobody knows you're there. There aren't really that number of options, so we might think it's a lot like the food. Until we get into it, we don't have to have 5 bedrooms and a swimming pool and granite counters. So what we'll find out is that our demand will change. The demand for the thing that we're asking for will change. Builders want to build, like a supplier, the most expensive house you're willing to buy. That's what they want to do. You want to buy the very best house you can buy for the least amount of money. The holdup is nobody knows exactly what that's going to be because we don't know what the future holds. It's moving too quickly. So right now, the interest is acting like inflation. It's jacking up the price, cutting off numbers of transactions, and the sellers are not getting as much money because of those economic conditions. Fewer are demanded, which means from their standpoint, they're competing against more of a supply. Now, what happens when we adjust to it? We'll adjust and make exactly what people want to buy. Have you ever heard someone in real estate say, well, we have high demand because we never built enough houses back from after 2008? Well, whoever says that doesn't understand economics, because that's impossible. That's just not true. The economy is always adjusting, and it produces exactly the right number. That's why we have that one dot at that intersection of those lines. It produces exactly. What happens is we change tastes. Maybe people don't buy a single-family freestanding home. Maybe they buy a townhouse. Maybe they buy a condo or something like that, go into a vertical platform. Maybe they buy something that's not a site-built house and buy a mobile home or something of this nature. There are substitutions for houses. And when we think of the house, we don't have to buy a specific one. You don't have to buy that steak. Maybe you have to go down to chicken, but you still get fed. We build enough houses to keep up. The economy demands it. So how does raising interest rate save the economy? When do we spend money, deficit spend? When do we print more money? When we are in a recession and we're trying to stimulate the economy and increase the output by printing the money and making the money flow in the economy. We do that when we're in recession. When do we try to kill the economy off? Is when we have inflation. And what causes the inflation? The printing the money. So to get out of a recession, we end up causing inflation. How do we cure inflation? By raising interest rates and killing off the economy. How does that help? Well, the first thing it does, anytime you raise prices, you create these deadweight losses, either by taxation or something else, or by shifting the demand itself. We do that. But if you took every item and all over the economy and you made all their prices go up, you're going to have a decrease in economic activity. And what do we call it when we decrease economic activity? We call that a recession if it's over 2 periods. So these two things are constantly fighting to be around the balance point. You're either in expansion, which brings about inflation, or you're in contraction, which brings about recession. That's how that works. Now, we can change our taste of what we buy over time. That is changing the quantity demanded over all prices versus changing the quantity demanded. Normally, if in just a short period of time, we're probably just going to change the quantity demanded. And over a period of time, we'll change the taste by what's available, and we'll build what we need, and we'll adjust. We will adjust. I hope that makes some sense. I don't know if I explained it real well. It's kind of difficult. But yes, houses are a lot like food. It's hard to live without shelter, but there's more option than you think about. You don't have to have, like, say, a second home. That's easily a flexible demand type situation, isn't it? Because at the snap of a finger, you don't have to have that second home. So there's more elasticity in housing than you might think. There really is. And it's not all tied to supply because, again, maybe you want a second house for an investment. Well, you could also invest in other things too. So there really is a number of substitution that gets in there, and it's really hard to call housing inelastic. In the short run, it's inelastic. In the longer run, it's actually it's probably very flexible. Hope that helps.